All right, it is 6:30, and welcome to the Adelante Progressive Caucus's third meeting for candidates. Um, Back in December when we first had this idea of inviting gubernatorial and lieutenant gubernatorial candidates, we had three gubernatorial candidates and three lieutenant gubernatorial candidates. And originally, the plan was to have uh, pair up a gubernatorial and a lieutenant gubernatorial because they're not running for the same office, so they can share their ideas without, you know, it's not a debate. Unfortunately, Jackie Lee Onsuarnez dropped out, and Ken Miyagishima went independent. So thankfully, our two candidates tonight both still in the race and are still Democrats. So,
Hey,
uh,
Colby, can I ask another question though, real quick? I'm sorry to interrupt your train of thought, but do you know the Lobos are on right now in the NIT?
oh
Right now,
no.
there's 10 minutes left. It's a 2-point game. I'm just messing with you.
Well, if someone wants to put that on, use their
Yes,
screen for the game, and then we can have it like as we're in the background. I'm down for that.
that's cool. I don't have that ability, but I just wanted to tell you I was a little distracted but anyways,
Oh,
I've gone into a different room. I can't hear it, I can't see it, so I won't be too distracted, but I appreciate the opportunity. I just wanted to mess with you a little bit.
no worries. So yeah, without further ado, we have gubernatorial candidate Mr. Sam Bregman. Welcome. Would you like to make an opening statement?
Well, listen, I'm thrilled to be part of this Zoom. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity and time to tell you a little bit about my candidacy and why I want to be the next governor. And I will tell you that right off the bat, as wonderful as we all know New Mexico is, I think we can all agree that it's probably never lived up quite to its potential. And I know that New Mexico has amazing opportunities ahead of us. And I want to be a leader that makes sure that every New Mexican has the same opportunities that I've had and I've been able to give my family, bringing them up, raising them, and having a career here. So, we've got a lot of challenges, certainly, when it comes to crime, when it comes to education, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to economic development. We have a lot of challenges when it comes to making sure we do all the right things and balancing economic development with the environment. We have a huge issue when it comes to water and how important that is for the whole future of this state. Not only dealing with, for example, economic development in the big picture, but we have to get a handle on making sure we know the big picture. When I say that, and I'll get right into it if you want, but I'm telling you, I think that water is going to dictate our future in such a huge, massive way that we have to speed up that whole mapping of our underground aquifers. We have to do everything we can to get a handle on what we have underground when it comes to fresh water. But it's too important. We have so many interests for the water. We have the agricultural industry, we have the acequias, the tribal interests. Um, we have the fights with Texas over the water. We have not the fights necessarily, but it may turn into a large fight, but the whole negotiations about the Colorado River and what we're doing with that and how much water we're going to be getting out of that. It's why I am proposing a cabinet level position to get the big picture and really look at it all when it comes to water. And I want to have a cabinet level position, a water resources department, so that we're looking at the big picture. When we have a new economic development and the opportunity to create more jobs, we have to always balance it with what it's going to do when it comes to water. When it comes to making a decision down south, we have to know how it affects up north with the acequias. When we make a decision up north, we have to know how it affects down south. And when we're in the lawsuit with Texas, what it's doing to our farming community down there in southern New Mexico. A lot, a lot of challenges, but I also think we have a can-do attitude. We can get things done and we can find that balance. I really believe that. So there's tremendous amount of issues, but I'm also very optimistic about our opportunities in the future. So I'll start there and we'll go from there. You guys ask me any questions you like.
Well, I'll go first. I'll ask you the same question I asked Deb Holland. and Maggie Toulouse-Oliver when they were at our previous meetings. Um, my, I agree. New Mexico has tremendous potential, but the fact of the matter is we are not on an economic par with California, Texas, Florida. We are very dependent on the federal government, and regardless of who's the next governor, we still have 2 more years of this presidency that is vindictive, especially against blue states. And my question is, what can we do as a state? The term states' rights has a negative connotation, but it really kind of has been brought to the surface as to like what can a state do in the face of a out of control federal government, especially when we're so dependent on it. So I want to hear your thoughts as to what can New Mexico do when we've got the labs and we've got um, the bases and so much other dependency on federal funds.
Colton, you don't have to be as old as me to remember when the Republicans used to wave the flag about states' rights every single day, and they've now completely lost um, their interest in states' rights. But it's an extremely important topic you bring up, and there has never been a more cruel, mean-spirited president who just, for some reason, likes to see people suffer. I've never seen anything like this in my life. I've been on the planet for 62 years. This isn't. You can go to every issue out there, whether or not it's ICE or anything else. This isn't the country that I grew up in where we're breaking the front window without any reasonable suspicion, probable cause, or judicial warrant and dragging someone out of a car and saying, prove to me that you're an American, get the F out. And that's not constitutional. It's not constitutional trained policing, and it certainly isn't um, lawful in the state of New Mexico. I mean, that's the definition of a crime right there. And I've been very clear about standing up to Donald Trump, and I will continue to stand up to Donald Trump every opportunity that I need to protect the citizens of New Mexico. And whether or not that's in a courtroom, which I'm very familiar with, I've been fighting for human rights and civil rights my entire life. That's what I've done in federal court and state court, and I will continue to do that. Whether or not it's pushing back and when this big, beautiful BS bill comes out, which isn't beautiful at all, there's nothing beautiful about it. The cuts in Medicaid alone is so significant and harmful in the long term. I'm very proud of the legislature and our current governor for stepping in and backfilling, if you will, to make sure that no New Mexican falls through the crack here in the next couple of years. But we've got a lot of long-term issues on that, and I hope that we can take back the Congress, obviously, in these upcoming elections and make a difference there. But it is a real a real important issue, and we need someone who's tough enough, who understands not only the legal side of things and the constitutionality and states' rights and all these issues, but we need a governor who's going to put New Mexicans first every single time. This is the last line of defense. The governor of the state of New Mexico for the harmful policies, the chaos coming out of Washington. I plan on standing up. Listen, if I can find some way to work with him that helps the people of New Mexico, we will do that. We'll do that absolutely. But at the same time, I'll use the bully pulpit, the courts, and every power that the governor possibly has to push back when necessary, because we can't let any New Mexican fall through the crack. You mentioned how dependent we are on Washington. And that is absolutely true for many of our dollars. We're very dependent on our military bases, our labs, and I can get into that a lot more on our labs because I'm actually excited about the future with our labs. But I have to tell you at the same time, we can't be in a situation where we just let the government, the federal government, create the chaos and we lie down and accept it. We can't ever let it normalcy. Although we have our challenges, we're also in a very unique position. We have the second largest wealth fund in the country. We are the second richest state when it comes to our reserves in the country. And I'm not suggesting we need to have a raid on the Treasury, because much of that we're going to need to continue to find other ways of spurring our economy, other ways to help businesses, other ways to help people with good jobs. But I will tell you this, because of that, we're not in a situation where we have an excuse that it's money and that's why we have to let New Mexicans fall through the cracks. To the contrary, we need to stand up and fight for every single New Mexican and make sure we're providing the basic resources. Medicaid's one thing, ICE is another thing, SNAP's another thing. The idea that he's going to sell off public lands is another thing. I mean, there's so much you can go down the list with this guy. And we have to stand up for who we are. And the next governor needs to be the kind of leader that pushes back, fights back, and tells it the way it is, and makes sure that New Mexicans don't fall through the cracks. Make sure our traditions, our culture, our diversity, all these important things that we are in New Mexico continue. Because right now, these are not times for weak people. These are times for tough people.
Thank you. Um, I apologize. We jumped into the first question, but Senator Pope, Lieutenant Governor candidate, is here. If you would like to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I'll reiterate the question I gave Mr. Bregman. Mr. Pope.
Are we just doing an introduction, or can I kind of do an opening speech? Just want to make sure I don't want to break any rules.
You can, we're the Adelante caucus. We're cool. You can give a speech, share what you want to share with us.
All right, thank you.
Back 5 minutes. I'm sorry. I want to check the score of the game.
Oh, no worries.
No problem. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the caucus, for having me. I'm Harold Pope Jr., and I'm proud to serve as your state senator for District 23. I'm a retired Air Force officer who started my career in the enlisted ranks, a former chemist, part-time educator, and I'm the oldest of 5 raised by a single mom who relied on government assistance when times were tough. So when I talk about fighting for working families, when I talk about opportunity, dignity, and fairness, I'm not speaking from a talking point. I'm speaking from lived experience. And that's exactly why I'm running to be your next lieutenant governor, because New Mexico deserves leadership that puts people first. You know, during my time in the legislature, I've worked to deliver real progressive change to our state. I was proud to be a co-sponsor to repeal New Mexico's outdated abortion ban, protecting a woman's right to make their own healthcare decisions. I supported the End of Life Options Act, ensuring that people facing terminal illness have dignity, compassion, and choice. I fought to expand free college here in New Mexico because education should open doors and not create debt. I've supported major investments in early child education and free childcare because we know that when we invest in our children, we invest in the future of New Mexico. I also co-sponsored legislation to increase healthcare coverage for our educators this last session because people shaping our next generation deserve access to quality care. I'm also continuing the fight to expand graduate scholarship opportunities so that more New Mexicans can pursue advanced degrees without financial barriers. I also helped create this last session a statewide STEM Innovation Center, actually in 25, that ensures our K through 12 students have access to tools, training, and opportunities they need to compete for the jobs in the 21st century. And I also stood firmly on the side of our immigrant communities this last session by co-sponsoring legislation to ban ICE detention centers and limits cooperation that harms our families because no one should live in fear in their community. These are not just policies. These are values in action. But we also know that the fight for a better New Mexico doesn't stop there, because right now we're facing powerful forces that are trying to reshape our economy and our communities, not for people, but unfortunately for profit. And I've taken a clear stand against private equity firms buying up single-family homes and driving up housing costs and pushing families out of their neighborhoods. I've spoken out against private equity ownership of our utilities because essential services like electricity and gas should not be controlled by out-of-state investors looking to maximize profits at the expense of New Mexicans. And I will continue to fight for policies that put ownership and accountability back in the hands of the people. I've also been clear when it comes to protecting our natural resources. We all know that water is life. And I've also fought to ensure that produced water from oil and gas operations is not discharged into our lands or waterways without the clear science and the proof that it is safe. Because no community should ever have to question whether their water is safe to drink. I've also stood up for clean air protections because our children should never have to deal or grow up with breathing air that would harm their health. And as new industries like large-scale data centers come to our state, I have been clear. We will not and we should not allow corporations to come in, consume massive amounts of water and energy, and leave our communities with the consequences. If you come to New Mexico, you must respect our people, our land, and our future. But I want to be clear, this campaign is not just about fighting against things that we are against. It's about what are we fighting for? And I believe the moment we are in calls for bold transformational leadership and moral clarity. As elected leaders, we cannot be afraid to tell the truth. We must be clear that climate change is an existential threat and act with urgency that this moment demands. We must be clear that healthcare is a right and not a privilege, and build systems that reflect that truth. And we must be willing to speak out beyond our borders when humanity is at stake. We must stand up for our BIPOC and LGBTQAI communities who are being disenfranchised against and having their stories and histories erased. And it also means that we must have the courage to call out all humanitarian crises and the genocide in Gaza, and stand up for all human rights and dignity and for peace. Because our values don't stop at the edge of our state, they define who we are. At the same time, we must ask the hard questions about our priorities here at home. Why are we sending billions of dollars to fund wars, while families in New Mexico are struggling to afford healthcare, housing, and basic necessities? It is time to invest in our people, not in endless conflict. That means advocating for bold policies here at home. We need to have a public option for healthcare in the state of New Mexico that can provide access to affordable, quality healthcare. We need to look at universal basic income because no one in this state should be struggling just to survive while wealth continues to concentrate at the top. We also have to be honest on how we fund these priorities. The wealthy and the large corporations must pay their fair share so we can invest in our communities and build an economy that works for everyone, not just those on top. We also need to create a statewide infrastructure investment plan that creates good paying jobs, rebuilding our roads, expanding clean energy, and modernizing our water systems, and investing in rural and urban communities alike. We must also diversify our economy for the future by investing in renewable energy jobs, growing advanced manufacturing, and expanding our outdoor recreation careers. Because our future cannot be tied to only one industry alone. We need an economy that is resilient, innovative, and built to last. And as we grow the economy, we must continue to invest in our people, ensuring that every worker earns a living wage. Because if we work hard in New Mexico, we should be able to afford to live in New Mexico. And yes, we must seriously pursue public ownership of our utilities so that decisions about energy futures are made based on what is best for our people, not what is most profitable for shareholders. You know, as Lieutenant Governor, I will not sit on the sidelines. I will be a different kind of leader. I'll show up and I'll continue to listen. I will be your voice on the fourth floor of the Roundhouse. I'll work alongside communities across the state because I just don't want to fight for you. I want to fight with you. This campaign is not going to be about endorsements. It's not going to be about fundraising numbers. And it's not going to be about name, ID, or recognition. It's going to be about building a movement that is rooted in the people of New Mexico, a movement that believes we can do better, a movement that believes we must do better. So I'm asking you to stand with me, to believe in New Mexico where healthcare is a right, where housing is affordable, where our water, our air, and our land are protected, where our economy works for everyone and not just the wealthy and well-connected, and where leadership is defined not by power, but by service. Together, we can build that future. Together, we can lead with courage, and together, we can put the people of New Mexico first. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity for speaking tonight.
Thank you, Senator. Very well said. So I'll just go into the same question that I asked Ms. Holland, Maggie Toulouse-Oliver, and Sam. New Mexico has a lot of potential, but is not on par with economies like California, Texas, or Florida, or New York. We are very dependent on federal funds. We have the labs, the bases, not to mention Medicare, Medicaid. Regardless of who's the next governor and lieutenant governor, we still have 2 more years of the Trump administration. It's very vindictive. And though the term states' rights traditionally has a negative connotation, I believe it's been elevated as a question put before us: what can states do in the face of an out of control federal government? So, what are your thoughts of what you could do from the position of lieutenant governor, in partnership with the governor, of course, to help New Mexico, a blue state, uh, protect itself from a vindictive federal government?
Sure. I think it's a little bit of kind of what I was talking about in the speech. There's a lot of things that we can do, and there's some things that we cannot do at the federal level, of course. We are dealing with the worst situation with this administration. We're going to get through this. Folks are going to continue to be harmed and hurt in the short term, though. And so we have to do all we can to fight together and to push back on this. But I also think what's important, everything that we can do at the state level and going forward, we have to invest in people, and we have to build the state that we want. It can't be just they're big and bad, they're doing this. What type of state do we want to build? How are we going to take care of our educators? How are we going to take care of our seniors? How are we going to invest in our veterans? How are we going to continue to educate our people to get into a workforce and rebuild the state? When I drive around and been visiting parts of the state, and I've already seen it before, and I'm not saying this to trash our state. I mean, simple things like our rest stops, we can do better, right? I mean, simple things of our infrastructure. We still have communities up north that don't even have the systems and the water systems to get water into their homes and into their communities and the facilities. So I think the first thing I would like us to do, and even though we are backlogged on capital outlay funding and things are, $7 billion waiting for a lot of funding to be spent, I would really call for us to have almost a statewide infrastructure package of what they did at the federal level. We have needs here, and it would provide jobs. It would help out a lot of our union brothers and sisters, carpenters, plumbers, pipe fitters, steel workers, everybody. We need to put people to work. And this would just provide an opportunity, but it's an investment in us, an investment in our communities. Separate from that, we need to find jobs that are clean and really share our values for our state. Data centers right now are like the new extractive industry. No different than uranium and coal mining, no different than oil and gas. The difference is we're selling some jobs at the expense of our emissions, the expense of the water that we don't have. And so we have to find industries that match what we do. I joke and tell people, everything isn't for New Mexico. We're never going to have a surf competition out here, right? We're not near an ocean, and we shouldn't be ashamed to say that that's not right for us. And so I want to see us build industries, especially renewable. I know I've talked about it in the Senate, and I keep getting on our economic development. We have Pattern Energy. We're selling all this electricity out of state. I don't really have an issue with that, but why aren't we investing in that ourselves as a state where this money comes back to us? Why aren't we investing in battery storage and then eventually doing the manufacturing in our state where we leverage with our labs and the patents and making sure that our students at UNM and our young people that get these degrees don't have to go somewhere else to utilize it? And so those are just a few of my ideas. Sorry, I was kind of all over the place. I mean, I think I could talk about this for hours.
Thank you very much. Dan, do you have the next question?
I have some questions. I don't have any questions for Senator Pope at the moment. Scotty had some questions she had for Sam Bregman, if that's appropriate right now.
Yes.
Is that good timing?
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead.
All right. So the first question as governor, what would you do to address possible private equity purchasing out public power, which is by nature a monopoly?
So I'm very concerned about the whole P&M issue, and I will tell you, we've got to find a place where when we have these kind of firms that want to come in and do something like this, that there's number one, the most important thing is that we're not going to see rates go up on our consumers here. And we need to have, and coming from the legal background, I will tell you it's important that we have, if this goes through, that there are contractual obligations with real consequences, that rates, number one, are not going to go up. And number two, you're not going to take the assets of New Mexico and take them out and basically bankrupt our power companies. That's just, we have seen too much of a track record that does exactly that. And I want to make sure that it's very clear that they can't do that. I'm also not willing to, like many are, and I understand it, reasonable people can have reasonable differences of opinion. I don't know that it's beneficial for the state to take over our power companies, for example. I don't think the state does certain things really well. To the contrary, I know that P&M doesn't do a lot of things well right now, but I also know that sometimes when we have really important responsibilities, like making sure that every single citizen has affordable and consistent electricity, the states doesn't perform a lot really well in a lot of different things. We don't have to look past too many things in state government. Just look at CYFD, with the most important asset we have, our children. We see the problems that having the government do certain things doesn't work. We have seen experiences across the country where that doesn't work. So we have to make sure there's some real consequences if they violate contractual obligations and real clawback provisions, so that we can't let them get away with it and we can't hurt the people. The most important thing to me is making sure that we have affordable, and with all the energy we have in this state, electric rates should not be going up on our citizens for at least the next decade, if you ask me. There is no reason why that should happen with renewables and with all the other energy resources we have. So that has to be, no matter what they're thinking, that has to be the number one priority when it comes to our power companies.
All right. So my other question is, what do you think North Dakota, for example, deep red state, has a public bank that basically provides capital for other banks in the area that basically makes capital cheaper. Do you think a public bank would be suitable for New Mexico?
The public bank, I think we need to make sure we're working in every way, shape, or form to make more available capital for all of our small businesses throughout this entire state. And I would be happy to explore that idea. I don't know all the ramifications of that. I've not gotten deep into whether or not a community bank by itself. I just need to know the legal framework and the consequences. I want to make sure that it's stable. I want to make sure that it's financially secure, but I have no problem with making sure we're doing everything we can to work with our banking communities to expand the ability for people, individuals, and businesses to get a hold of capital to be able to invest in themselves and in businesses. Yes.
All right, thank you. I don't have any questions at the moment.
Senator Pope, did you want to comment on those, even though they were kind of generic?
Sure. I'll just comment on the state purchase. I think what many of us are talking about is really, just want to be clear, a majority stake in PNM or New Mexico Gas, sort of like the investments that the State Investment Council do. DA Bregman, I agree with you. It's not all about the government and the state taking over. We're not the greatest at managing things. But I look at it as what the state does already with other investments and Wall Street and everything else. And if we took a majority stake of 51%, having some seats on the board, State Investment Council doing that, we would be able to protect our ratepayers. We got into another situation of another pandemic, make sure we're not cutting off utilities for folks. And so that's how I would envision it. And then when it comes, I think the other question was a public bank. I've sponsored that bill in the past. I still support it, but I'm also wondering why we have a state investment council that can't do something similar. I think we just are not investing enough in New Mexico. We're investing in Wall Street. We invest in other projects, even around the world. Can we use the state investment council and the funds that we have and invest that in our state. Maybe that is the route to go versus a public bank. Once again, I sponsored the bill, I support it, but I think there's more ways that we can invest with the certain structure that we have now.
Can I add one more thing to this?
Sure.
Cool, Colt?
Yeah, go ahead.
Listen, the state can do really good stuff, and certainly with the wealth of the state right now. Let me give you just a quick example, and I'll get back to your questions. When it comes to housing, for example, the state should be setting aside a fairly large fund to allow people to get help with a down payment assistance. People are paying $2,000 a month for rent, but they don't have the downstroke. They don't have the downstroke and in my lifetime, I've seen that home ownership is the pathway to the middle class. We all know that. We should be giving people assistance for down payment, whether or not it's $25,000 to $50,000, and for starter homes, so that the state takes a second on it. It's interest free as long as that person lives in it, or if they sell it or if they move out of it, they have to pay off. But then they've built the equity up. And now they have the downstroke for the next house, the move up house, if you will, when their family expands. We can do these things. We just have to have the willpower to do it. And you talk about creating jobs. Right now, home builders aren't building affordable starter homes because there's not enough buyers with that downstroke. That can change. We can do that. And this is, I think, a way of doing that, just that. Using capital to help our people is exactly what the state needs to be doing.
Thank you. Carol, do you have a question?
Really quick, I wanted to double check with Dan. I know you said you didn't have any questions, but I didn't want to take any questions from you regarding the dams in New Mexico. Are you okay with me asking that question, or did you want to ask
No,
that
go for
question?
it. Go for it.
Okay. I'm gonna I normally ask education questions, but this time I'm going to ask. So a while back, I read an article, I believe it was from KRQE, about the number of dams in New Mexico that are in great states of disrepair or near failure, especially in the southeast part of the state. And to me, and it's very concerning, and that's why DA Bregman, I'm so happy you brought up the water issue, because that's been something that's constantly been coming up with Adelante, is the concern about water. And for me and my husband, we talk a lot about this. And the aquifers, they take a while to fill up, like they're huge, but it takes a while for them to fill up. And a lot of our water comes from the various reservoirs and dams and things like that. But as we've done research, we found out there are some reservoirs that have no water in them because the dams are broken. Why are the dams broken? Nobody seems to know. And to me, that seems like a huge mismanagement of water. So if you are governor, how would you address the broken dam infrastructure situation in New Mexico? Thank you.
Of course, thank you for the question. And it's bigger than just the dams. It's our entire water resource that we have to pay such close attention to. And that's why I'm suggesting that we need to actually have a water resources department, which the state engineer, the Interstate Stream Commission is underneath, so that we're getting the big picture. Because we all know that in 25 years, we're going to have 25% less water, stream water, surface water. We're going to have 25% less. We better get this figured out. Now, not only did the state engineer tells me it's going to take 8 years to finish all the mapping of the underground aquifer. Well, that's important. I think we ought to move it up to 2, and we need to put the resources in so that we get a handle on that. Our infrastructure for our water systems, you go all the way to our acequias. I mean, the most basic bare bones systems. So much work can be done in that area. and we need to invest in our water resources. And because it affects so many different things, it affects the acequias and the traditions and the way of life up there, the agricultural community all over the north, and that for that matter, all over the state of New Mexico. The tribal interests, some of them ancient tribal water rights that we need to respect and honor. The whole way, prior appropriation was the law of the land for the state of New Mexico. And because of that, people have certain rights that we have to work through and understand. We have to get a handle on exactly how much water each municipality really owns when it comes to water rights, and how we're going to fulfill those obligations to the people that live here, but also how are we going to fulfill our obligations to all the agricultural community and the new economic development. And we have to make tough choices. And we're going to need someone who's tough to be able to make those choices. And I know that the number one thing is we protect every precious drop of our water resource. But at the same time, we have an opportunity because we do sit on the largest brackish water aquifer in the entire world. I'm not suggesting that we're going to start using brackish water for human consumption or for crops that we consume. But I am saying when you have economic development that needs water, then we do have the technologies now, the desal technology, to treat that water, for example, to an industrial standard so that we don't have to use our precious fresh water for those purposes. And we've got to look at the big picture. And so when it comes to building up our dams and making sure they're the most possibly efficient manner of getting our water to the users and the fresh water so that we're not losing it, I'm all about it. And we need to make major investments in our water systems throughout the entire state. And we need to get a handle on what everybody's rights are. And we need to, when we need to fight Texas. We need to fight Texas over our water rights. We need to take care of our stuff. This is about the person who's going to lead New Mexico. And we're going to have a lot of fights on our hands. We already do. But we're going to have to continue to have those fights because that's the way it is. And if we don't have those fights, and if we're not tough and we're not standing up, not only are they going to try and take the ludicrous stuff that we're hearing about Texas wanting to take part in New Mexico, but next you're going to hear about how they're going to take more of our water. So listen, I believe we need to fight. And we need to fight for the people of New Mexico, our traditions and our culture. And so much of it is based on water that it is going to dictate the future of New Mexico in so many big ways. That's why we have to get it right.
Thank you. Senator Pope, would you like to comment?
Sure, and I apologize if you hear the mariachi band playing. I'm at Rep. Robo Caballero's fundraising event at Indian Pueblo Cultural Center, so I apologize. Try to find a quiet place. I think DA Bregman brought up some great points, and I think that's what I was talking about earlier, that we really need to make those investments when it comes to our dams and infrastructure and the water systems in some of our communities. Not only are they inefficient, but they're wasting water. There's a lot of spillage, and the water is not getting down to the people that really need it. And I think that's where, as a state, we need to prioritize these systems, just like our roads and our bridges. I would even go so as far as to say, as a state, we need to reform our capital outlay. That's not going to make many of my colleagues happy, but every year we get, in the Senate, probably right now, when times are good like now, about $4 million, and we bring money back to our districts and pay for projects, and even big projects statewide. But I think we need to maybe look at that and maybe have a different direction and look at what are the statewide priorities, because some of these communities might only have one state senator and have a lot more needs than a senator like me in Albuquerque that has multiple state senators that can combine our resources and get some things done. On top of that, has the city GRT and the county GRT to make a lot of this happen. We also need to really consider how we use water. Agriculturally, what types of things are we growing? I know people don't want to have that hard conversation, but we need to have that conversation. We also need to look at, why is oil and gas using fresh water? That shouldn't be. Why are we using our fresh water for that industry? We need to look at that. And look, I'm against produced water because they haven't told us what they're using in the process, but yet they're telling us that they're able to clean it up. I just don't believe it. But They have to clean it up because it's there and it's in the pits. It's out in our environment. They have to clean it. I want them to clean it. They should be cleaning that up and using that for the industry going forward. And so these are things that we can do. Brackish water is an option, but I got to be honest, it's the same thing. People don't recognize that with brackish water, you do have radioactive materials. You do need to make sure that we are identifying what is in there. And some of it might be able to be used as, some of the other industrial water things that we would water plants with, but would not be potable water and for consumption of people. But for me, I think we need to ensure that we identify where these brackish aquifers are. We've identified what is in there, and we make sure that we can clean it up before we make huge investments on drilling and building some of these systems. But that's definitely going to have to be a route. We're also going to need to identify what happens when we pull this brackish water out. Is there going to be implications to the land, or is it going to create sinkholes, right? We got to characterize and deal with these issues. This water issue is a huge issue. Every year we've started now a water leaders conference with the legislators and the water experts. We do recognize that we're going to have less water. We saw that we really didn't have a winter. We've already seen the Rio Grande be dry. It's going to be worse. And then the fires, right? And so we just have to be careful and really push. And there's going to be some tough times and there's going to be some tough decisions. Just like the tough decisions in Albuquerque when folks made recommendations to say, we're going to zero-scape. You're only going to be able to water your grass on these days, right? And back then people were, going crazy, right? But if we didn't even enact those, imagine where we would be today. And so I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. Cricket, do you have a question? Oh, you're muted.
Hello, everyone. First, before I get to my question, talking about water in our area here, Magdalena, west of us, we've had it's going on probably 19 years that they've been trying to take water from the San Agustin Plains. And I guess it's a gentleman from Italy who wants to mine the water. And as of a couple years ago, we thought the battle was ended, but I guess, let's see, the first application that they filed was in 2007, and the local folks have been fighting this all these years. We just want to make sure that they don't take the water because that will affect, this is near the VLA, it'll affect the ranchers, it'll affect hunting and all that. So when you talk about water, I have a local issue. But my question is about education. The school here, we have, unfortunately, we didn't even meet the state average as far as our reading and math, yet we had a 80+% graduation rate, which to me means we're just pushing the kids through the school. But one of our big problems is truancy, and we don't have any kind of teeth we can't make the parents send their kids to school. So we've been trying a lot of different things to try to get the parents to understand the importance of education. And I'm sure that's the same in lots of areas of the state. Do you have any ideas of how to educate New Mexicans about the importance of basic reading, writing, for job training, for college, etc.?
Thank you for the question. I can't agree with you more. Because education is where we start for all of these other discussions, whether or not we're talking about public safety and crime, whether or not we're talking about healthcare, economic development, the environment. It all starts with education. And if we're not teaching our kids the basic reading, writing, mathematics, we're not going to do well for our kids. And listen, it's no secret we're 50th in the country when it comes to education. We're 50th in child well-being. We all know those statistics. We're also number one in something you just mentioned. We're number one in chronic absenteeism in schools. We're number one in the country. That's one of the reasons why we're not doing well. I recently spoke to a public charter school, which was a very interesting experience. I did the commencement last year for them. And one of the things they were telling me was this is a public charter school that works with a very impoverished part neighborhood in Albuquerque. They had 49 students in sixth grade. They graduated 49 students out of high school. And every one of them is either going into the military, a 2-year college, excuse me, a 2-year trade school, a 4-year college. So exciting. And I asked them, how did you get it done? How did you get, with everything that these kids and these families are dealing with, how were you able to get such success? And they told me something that I'm sure your community's trying to work with as well, but it's all about the schools reaching out and actually working with the parents and the families and going, why isn't your kid in school? We're not talking about the high school student who is joyriding with his girlfriend down at the local Sonic. We're talking about fourth graders who haven't been in school for 2 weeks. It's not because they're sick. It's perhaps because their parent, a single mom, for example, is working 2 jobs and there was nobody there to make sure that young person got on the bus. These are things, I mean, we have to look at this holistically about getting these kids educated. If they're not in the schoolhouse, we're not getting the job done. We all know that. We have to change things like a PED secretary. We've had 6 PED secretaries in 6 years. I'm not attacking our current executive, our current governor, but it doesn't work when you want leadership and continual leadership and direction. It doesn't help when there's a new leader every single year. It's hard to get your feet planted and moving in the right direction. Transparency is so important when it comes to our education system and holding everybody accountable. Look, we don't have to reinvent the wheel on a lot of this, Cricket. I'm telling you right now, we used to battle, and I think everybody knows this, with Mississippi on who was 50th in the country in education. We're still 50th. Mississippi is now 13th in the country. They call it the Mississippi Miracle. How did they get it done? I spoke with the lady who ran those schools, and she let me know it's all about accountability, holding everybody accountable. School districts, administrations, teachers, parents, kids, everybody's held accountable. So let's start, for example, and I could go on and on about education. You stop me if you guys have heard enough. But when it comes to education, districts need to place and put up their goals. Every school district in this state needs to be transparent about what their goals are, and they need to be transparent about whether or not they're meeting those goals. And that requires the administrations of the schools working with the school districts and the leaders in the school districts to make sure that, in fact, they're meeting those goals. And when they're not meeting those goals, that's when you have PED. PED should absolutely have a team of super tutors, master teachers that rush in to those schools that are falling behind, to those classrooms that are falling behind, and help those students, because we know something. And that is that if they're not reading at the 3rd grade level, if they're not writing at the 3rd grade level, and they're not doing math at the 3rd grade level, we know they're going to struggle all the way through the rest of the research shows. For the most part, they're going to struggle. And so how do we address that? We get people in the 1st grade, the 2nd grade, to identify those folks, those classrooms that are struggling, those schools that are struggling, making sure they're getting all the required help in the classroom, making sure that we're, of course, paying great teachers great salaries. We have to remember that. That's really important. But PED could be used to target and help those schools that are really falling behind. And I think that's something that we have to do. Every time, and I get the opportunity to be the next governor, every time I'm given the opportunity to speak about education, we're going to talk about how important education is. It is going to be center and forefront with every person out there in this community. I can assure you it will not take long that everybody will know how important it is to get your kids educated if they want to have the kind of future, because not every kid's going to go to college. But if you want to be an electrician, a pipe fitter, or a plumber, you still need to do math. You still need to be able to read. You need to be able to actually do all these important things. And I don't care about AI. AI is not going to turn a wrench for an electrician. All these things are important, and we have to bring all of them together. And I think that it starts with our school systems. It starts with making sure that we understand why a kid's not. And we have to deal with all of these big major issues. And affordability is one of them. Getting the kids on the school bus. Some kids travel 3 hours a day because we're such a rural state to get the kind of education that they need to get because they're on the bus an hour and a half one way and they're on a bus an hour and a half the other way. And that's a long bus ride. And we can do all kinds of creative things, but when it comes down to it, we have to identify first and second graders before they even get to the third grade when they're struggling. And I'm a big proponent of that. And we can do a heck of a lot better than we're doing. We need to have solid leadership that is consistent and holding everybody accountable, including parents. You're talking about parents that aren't getting their kids to schools. It's a huge problem, and it's one of the big problems we have. And rightfully or wrongfully, whatever you feel, yeah, you're right. The truancy laws have been watered down to such an extent there is really no teeth. I get that. So that falls upon the school districts and every person that works in the school district, whether or not it's a teacher, a teacher's assistant, whether or not it's a nurse, a social worker, an advisor. We have to get everybody in lockstep about getting kids in school and getting them the help they need.
Thank you. Senator Pope?
Sure, thank you. It's a little disturbing to hear, but I know we've wanted to do some adjustments. A few years ago, we did pass the Student Success Act to kind of looking at truancy kids being gone from school, setting up parameters on a certain number of missed days where they contact CYFD and try to follow up with students. But there's no way to really know what's happening at each school and each district. And so I think we need to look back at that. I know I'm looking at some modifications because we do have some folks and students with disabilities that unfortunately on the other end are being counted as truant or missing school when it's legitimate reasons for medical appointments and for health reasons. Look, I brought up earlier in the opening about having that lived experience, and I'm all about accountability, but it's all about making sure of what's happening in the household. And look, I get it. A lot of the responsibility is the parents. A lot of the responsibility is making sure they get to school and they're ready to learn. But if that structure isn't there, if you have parents working two jobs, and in some cases during COVID and after, some of these kids went to work. And so I want to hold people accountable, but what do we as a state to make sure that we are having more community schools? And that's a lot easier to say in Albuquerque, but what are we doing in our rural and tribal areas? How are we providing more mentorship? How are we providing more after-school programs, right? Because in a lot of cases, lunchtime and breakfast and even after school sometimes might be the only place some of our kids are getting a healthy meal. And so I think we still have a lot of huge issues with education, but we have a lot of great students and great teachers doing a great job. But I think what we have to continue to invest in is the communities to be more equitable on who needs the most help, who needs the most resources, and what's going on in the community and the homes. When we have, for example, in Albuquerque, I've heard over 3,000 students that are pretty much unhoused. You got kids living in vehicles. You've got kids that don't have the resources to have a steady home. So how do we expect these kids to do well in school? So I want to see more investments in those areas. Hopefully that helps with truancy as well. And once again, I'm all about the accountability. If you're missing school and the parents aren't doing their job, we need to get folks involved to help these kids. It's not the kids' fault. On the other hand, I think we need to ask the questions of what do these families need? so that their kids can actually succeed in school, graduate, and just like you mentioned, Cricket, not they just push through with the diploma, and then we find out later that they're not ready for college, or in some cases they can't even read, right? So that does not do anything for them. It does not prepare them for a career or to be a productive citizen here in New Mexico. So I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. Now we'll open to questions from our membership. Catherine, would you like to go first?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Good evening, gentlemen. A question for you both. I am down in Valencia County. Of course, we just had the unified fire, which was 500 acres. Thankfully, crews were able to prevent any structure damage or loss of life. But as you both mentioned, this has been virtually no water winter, virtually no winter. It's going to be a very difficult year for fire. Could you please both speak to how you will answer the growing climate change, environmental disasters like fire, or like we saw in Rito, so fire and flooding, given that it is probably just going to continue in that pattern? And if you could please answer to your first year as either governor or lieutenant governor versus your fourth year, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Well, right off the bat, I guess I'm going first, right? Still, I don't want to
Generally, yeah, that's
I'll let you go first since you'll make the final decision. Yeah.
Okay. So no, listen, I really want us to invest in our wildfire firefighters. I want to invest in the ability to make sure that our workforce out there, when it comes to our national forest, when it comes to our state forest, when it comes to the Bosque up and down, that we are investing in clearing and clearing out all the fuel out there to make sure that we have the best possible situation. Fires are going to happen. We know that. There's only so much we're going to be able to do, but we have to right off the bat increase the number of people who are working in this area right away. And I think that's really essential because we know we can do a lot better. Speaking of which, I do want to say that I am going to hold, and I hate to use this pun, the federal government's feet to the fire when it comes to making sure they are taking care of people in pain, and FEMA and all of the disaster we've seen with the way they've operated and the way they've taken care or lack of taking care of people up north in the huge fire just a couple of years ago. So the first year, you're going to see a real emphasis on the number of people that we're going to employ as a state when it comes to firefighters and wildland firefighters, because I think it's really important that we do that. Again, climate change is real. It's happening in a big way, and we have to be ready for it. So overall, though, we can do a lot of things, and we have the ability and the capital to get things done. And I'm committed to doing that. The economies, I mean, listen, what fires do, and I know this personally because I have a lot of friends that live in Ruidoso, and what they've done and with the floods, what they've seen happen to their livelihoods. We need to give so many of the small businesses assistance there that have been affected by that, and it's destroyed their economy for this summer. I mean, literally destroyed their economy. Ruidoso's hanging by a thread right now, and I think anybody that's been down there can appreciate that. It's pretty scary. So I don't have many more specifics for you between the first year and the fourth year, but I know we need to dedicate resources to it. And I think it's really important that we do so and that we really have a statewide effort on making sure we do away with the fire hazard out there to the best of our abilities, right? But the dry climate, for 10 years now, I've been going to CLEs, the continuing legal education classes about the environment. And for 10 years, I've seen the maps of how our forests are going to continue to shrink because of climate change and because of the hot weather and because of the fire situation. So I do think I have an idea that it's a little bit bleak when you look at that, but at the same time, I think we can do a lot of things on the ground right away to start trying to buffer the state a little bit from the disasters that it causes.
Thank you.
And
Senator Pope?
I'll just say that, look, it's here. This is a reality, what we're dealing with. And I think this goes to part of how we can provide some jobs and some resources. We got plenty of young people who love the outdoors, may not want to go to college, but they want to be in the outdoors and do this type of work. I'd also say we need to reach out and understand what a lot of our indigenous communities have done for centuries and learn from them. I know down in Mescalero and some of our tribes know a great deal of what to do to make sure that we are removing a lot of the old trees and plant life that spur a lot of these fires. I'd also like to say I met the gentleman many of you probably seen on Instagram and TikTok, let's bring goats out there to kind of clean up some of our forests and do some of this work as well and make those investments. We also have a lot of work to do with remediation on places that the fires have occurred. These are going to be places where there's going to be a lot of floods, a lot of mud washing down, causing more damage to infrastructure and to land. And so we have a lot of investments to make, a lot of things to prepare for, but we can take it as an opportunity to give people jobs and increase a workforce that is much needed. This isn't going away, and if it does, it's not going to go away soon. Because, quite frankly, we've let this happen for so long, and we've been told that this is what's going to happen in climate change, and this is where we're at. And so we have to do all we can to remediate it. I live not far from the Bosque. It's scary because you have folks who accidentally start fires, purposely start fires, and that place just lights up just because how dry it is. And I was down there at the Bosque School and the work that they're doing, and the young people really care about this and are doing a lot of work. And just thinking about the ecosystem and the animals, I never realized that there were porcupines down there, and I got to see a few for the first time, and they're tracking them. And I mean, they're going like 2 miles up near the petroglyphs. It's wild to know that they do that, these animals. Sorry, I'm getting into something else, but I just think this is so big and we don't realize really what is always around us and how important it is to protect it. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. We have 30 minutes left. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to request that the candidates just try to keep your responses as quick as possible so we can get as many people's questions addressed. Next up, Sonia. Did you have your hand up? Sonia.
I think Sonia
Yeah,
put a
I'm here.
question in the chat. Oh,
Yeah, I put it in the chat, but I can say it here. Hey, y'all, in light of what's going on with the recent debate regarding birthright citizenship and the potential impacts that it's going to have here in New Mexico, I was wondering what your thoughts and opinions are regarding that debate and what you feel like our plan should be. Thank you.
If you're born in the United States of America, you're a United States citizen. I don't think it can be any more clear than that to me. I, I, uh, I'm hopeful, but you never know with the current makeup of our United States Supreme Court. We know they just had arguments about this, but I heard arguments about this. But once again, the cruelty and the complete obnoxious anti-constitution president that we have is really shocking. But I am 100% believe that if someone is born in this country, they are a United States citizen. End of story, full stop. I'm trying to be brief, as was asked.
And I'll just say I'm not an attorney, and Sam's heard this joke before. I just dress better than most of them, but that's what it is. Look, I think it's clear. I think even former justices, current justices know what this is. You're born here, you're a citizen. Look, anything can always happen, and it has happened sometimes, but look, we know what it is, and you're a citizen if you're born here. And so that's where I stand.
Thank you. Carol.
Thank you again for I couldn't help myself. I had one more education question. One is a general question, and then the other one is a thank you to Senator Pope. So kind of intertwine the two. I really wanted to say thank you to Senator Pope. You had called me right before the pre-primary convention And it was in regards to hidden blacklists that several districts have, where school districts have these blacklists where principals and admins and powers that be have, for personal reasons, that sort of thing, have placed teachers they have personal issues with or grievances or whatever, but are highly qualified. They have put them on do not hire lists, and they aren't contractually obligated to hire them, but they have definitely said we do not hire these people. So that's kept a lot of qualified educators out of the classroom because there's grievances with administration. When I brought this up with Senator Pope had said, well, maybe PED should step in, and if there are real grievances, maybe there should be investigations into teachers about keeping their teaching licenses. So I wanted to say thank you for supporting teachers in that way and maybe getting more of that transparency out. Well, thank you for that. And then my other question is, what are your thoughts of having an advisory board of teachers on PED at the state level? That's always been something kind of close to my heart, especially since teachers themselves cannot run for school boards because it's a conflict of interest. So what would you think of having a board of teachers advising PED at the state level?
So first of all, I would also compliment the senator on that answer that he gave you, because I think that's important. Not only should we not be putting up with, just because someone has a personal grievance with a teacher, that they're put on a blacklist and they're blackballed, if you will. That's not acceptable. And so I don't agree with that, especially in light of the fact that some people that should not be teaching, and I know this from being the district attorney, that do terrible things, and the school district should have known about that long before that happened, and they didn't tell anybody about it, and then kids get hurt. So I too would congratulate Senator Pope on that, and I appreciate your question, and I think it's important. I just spoke with the NEA, National Education Association Union. I spoke with the Albuquerque Teachers Union, and I am very committed to getting input. What that specifically looks like, whether it's a board, whatever it is, we have to have teachers' input on how we're moving forward when it comes to education. So I'm very supportive of getting teachers' input, and whether or not that's some type of advisory board or whatever it may be, whatever that actually comes down to, helping PED, making sure that PED is doing the things they should be doing, but making sure education overall is really working the way it should, because teachers have a very valuable perspective on what happens in the classroom and whether or not, for example, the funding is really getting down to the classroom, the resources, they're getting the kind of resources they need as teachers. So I'm very supportive of that, and I will certainly support teachers' input, whether or not it's on a board or some other type of entity, whatever that might be.
And Carol, thanks for that conversation we had and understanding that. Look, like I told you, I'm not with these blacklists, and if people are not fit or there's an issue, then it should be transparent and they should understand what's going on. There shouldn't be this secretive list when it comes to that. I want to understand a little more about how we would do this board, but I think it's always good to have that representation and insight. No different than how we have student regents at our universities, right? I think it's great to have someone that is actually in the system, representative of that board or commission. And so I probably want to talk a little more about how we would structure that. And I'm not trying to push back, because we do have the teachers union and that voice. I think having someone represented as an advisory board would be a good thing. And so I just would want to understand a little more about how we would do that, how we would put people in place, and what power they would have. But I'd be open to it.
Thank you. Next up, Matt Dodson.
Here, thank you very much. Say I've got an issue that I believe that we have a huge economic downturn coming, if not, especially after the Iran war, an enormous depression coming. And here's what I witnessed in 2010 to 2012 after the 2008 crash. Our sovereign wealth fund and our two retirement funds. So the state retirement funds are divided between the teachers and then the other state employees. And I know that the two retirement funds had so much money invested in the stock market, just making killer returns. Oh, it was fabulous. Same thing with the wealth fund. And then the crash hit. And the two retirement funds were bankrupt. They were out of money. And everyone was just crapping as to where they're going to come up with the money to pay the retirees out of those funds. So, heads up, and please answer the question: are you aware of this? Is it on your radar? Are you going to limit what kind of excessively aggressive investing that these funds can do, so that they do not once again run out of money?
Let me say this right off the bat. As an attorney, earlier in my career, I represented people who completely got shafted, for lack of a better term, from their investment advisors when they were put in far too risky of investments, when they were 60, 65 years old, and they're putting in these high risk equities that they should never have been put into. And I held people accountable for that. I will tell you, of course, our investment funds are extremely important to the future of the state. It's what we got, right? It's what we have. It is, for any people call it a lot of different things, but it's a nest egg there that is for the betterment and quality of life of the people of New Mexico. That's what it's there for. So of course, we have to make sure that they're investing. We want returns on our money, of course, but we have to invest it the right way. What we're seeing with the Iran war, and I think I've been fairly vocal about this, and some of you may not agree with this, but we are going to, because of the spike in oil prices, we know that the state's going to get between $500 million to $1.5 billion more money in because of the spike in oil prices. At the same time that that's going on, we also know that people are hurting with the affordability issue. People are hurting at the pump, $4 a gallon, $5.50 for a gallon of diesel. That's going to cause our groceries to go up in a big way. The cost of living, just being a person living, is going to go up in a big way. And it's a real issue. And it's why I've stated that for a family making $200,000 or less, we're going to need to help folks. And when we recoup this, when we get all this money from this spike in these oil prices, we need to actually give it back to the people in the form of $500 checks. So a family of four making less than $200,000 is going to get $2,000 back to help with this crazy increase in not only gasoline, but groceries. We know how expensive it is out there. It is, after all, generated from the people's resources. That's New Mexicans' resources that is generating that money. We should be giving that money back, especially in a time of need like this. It's not allocated to be spent on something else right now. But I'm telling you, the extra income that this state gets from the spike in oil, we need to give back to the people. I mean, we need to be reasonable about it. But if you make $200,000 or less right now, you're hurting. You're hurting with these increase in costs. So that's, for an example. I hear you loud and clear. I'm concerned too about the economy overall, but I also know New Mexico needs to take care of its people. And that's why I'm suggesting what I'm suggesting.
Matt, I'm concerned similarly, but this is where we're going. He's crashing the economy and making money off it. We know what this is. Press conferences. I'm going to drive the oil up, make my friends have bought futures. In another 2 weeks, he'll talk about negotiations. We're taking tariffs off. These guys are going to, go long or short and make money the other way. I think with this issue, it's important that there's things that we can do in leadership in the state on this issue, but it's also important understanding who serves on the boards of PARA and ERB and who is making a lot of these decisions. And so we also have to make sure that they're accountable and understand their jobs and not in some of these risky investments. That being said, some of these investments, you can actually make money in a downturn. That's not what we want, but I think we need to make sure people in these positions understand that and they're preparing for that, so that we are making sure that we keep people whole at the end. When it does come to these retirements, I think it's also important that we look out for the folks that are getting it now. I get calls from para retirees on what happened with their COLA, that they're getting hit what happened a few years ago. So people are struggling, they're not making it. And we do need to look at how we get some of this money back to folks with what's going on with oil and what's going on with inflation. I agree with the DA. I would argue maybe a little lower on the amount of money and that you make. We have working people working 2 jobs, making 40, 50,000 a year. Those people are really suffering and hurting right now. So I would advocate for maybe more money, but bringing that cap down. So we'll see what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathleen, you have your hand up?
Hi, I'm a retired public health nurse who's helped pass some legislation to require insurance coverage for children's hearing aids, stock emergency meds for school nurses treating asthma and allergy emergencies in schools. But I'm concerned that gun violence is the leading cause of children's deaths. And our gun violence deaths are a contributor to a lack of feeling of safety in schools and a barrier to recruiting professionals across the board. Gun violence, homicides, suicides will increase with temperature. Many firearm deaths are suicides, and sometimes those folks take people with them. And gun violence costs New Mexico $6.6 billion annually. 13 out of 16 states with a Democratic trifecta have passed semi-automatic and/or large capacity magazine restrictions, including Virginia, who just elected a Democratic governor. How would either of you lead to move firearm safety forward with the legislature, and particularly a semi-automatic firearm and large capacity magazine restriction?
So I am so glad you asked that question because if you've been paying attention, I'm sure you have, you've been paying attention to my career as the district attorney. I've been now to 20 different schools. I think every high school in Albuquerque, with the exception of 1 or 2, talking about this very issue of gun violence and talking about the effect that it's having on our young people and our criminal justice system, on our schools. Within 6 months of being the district attorney, I came out with a zero tolerance policy on guns on campuses. It is so critically important because I will tell you, crime overall in this state right now, believe it or not, and some people don't believe me when I tell them this, but I see what comes across my desk. Overall, crime is starting to get better, except one particular area: juveniles with guns. And juveniles with guns committing violent crime is going in the absolute wrong direction. And I have at least once a week for going on 3 years now, met with a family who's lost a kid to gun violence. It is the most horrific thing you can ever imagine, having to talk to parents who've lost their kids to gun violence. And it doesn't have to be this way. And just to kind of put a little bit more context on the whole issue, the sickest, worst thing of my job is the gut feeling that I have. Every night when I go to bed, I'm thinking, my God, I hope that another kid, well, every kid makes mistakes, but that another kid doesn't make a terrible mistake with a gun. Because my office has had to indict 77 juveniles in 3 years for murder. For murder. It's so awful. And it is a problem that times have changed so dramatically. A kid can go on the app of Telegram, and I have desperately tried to get the legislature, and this is not directed or any offense to our senator that's on right now. I have desperately asked the legislature to just even debate one bill, for example, that said if you give or sell or transfer a gun to a kid, that it should be a second-degree felony. Right now, it's a fourth-degree felony contributing to the delinquency of a minor. And the reason that I want that is because I want some kind of teeth to hold so many people who are responsible for selling these guns on Telegram. Basically, a kid gets on Telegram and within 2 hours can go 2 blocks down the street and enter into a gun transaction with some person who's willing to sell him a gun. It is outrageous. And so this problem is closer to me than you can imagine. I deal with this issue every single day. As you probably are also aware, I have tried to pass reforms in our juvenile criminal justice system to provide more behavior health and family intervention along with more consequences, just so kids learn something and get the help they need. Why were they out stealing a car at 2 a.m? Where were their parents then? Why haven't they been in school for 2 weeks? Because what happens is they keep escalating and escalating, and they don't learn anything except they can get away with it. And that's so frustrating for me. The biggest single thing I will tell you, though, to move the needle on gun violence overall is to truly beef up the felon in possession laws. The felon in possession laws, the people who are selling these guns, by the way, to kids and giving these kids these guns, the vast majority of them are already felons. We need to have a felon in possession tough law, because if they've already been convicted of a felony, they need to be held accountable so that we can stop their conduct, because too often their conduct is resulting in a 15-year-old getting a firearm and doing a terrible thing with it. And I've shown a video now probably over 20 times of a young girl who was shot just hanging out with her friends and by a couple of kids that just wanted to be tough at the point. And she was shot 14 times. And the high capacity magazines is a true problem, a real problem, and we have to do something about it. But I will tell you, the single biggest thing we can do to affect gun violence is, one, toughen our laws for felons, people already convicted, because so many of them are the ones selling the guns to these kids. And the second thing is having some teeth for prosecutors to be able to charge these people who are willing to give these guns to kids. That is a disaster going on right now. It's so prevalent. It is everywhere right now. Now, gun violence, when you start talking about gun violence, you can bring in, and I don't want to ignore it, the whole host of other issues on our young people and the root causes of whether it's poverty, whether or not it's education, all those issues that kids without guidance or kids with plenty of time on their hands, and they have a cell phone now. They can do so much with this little cell phone now that they could never have done 25 years ago. So gun violence and gun violence with kids is a real problem. Felons in possession is a real problem. So I don't want to go, I could go on forever about crime, but thank you. Thank you for the question.
Senator Pope?
Sure. I think it's all about, and I think the DA brought up some great points. It's all about access. We've had some gun bills since I've been in the legislature that I voted, safe storage, red flag laws that I've also supported. And even the bill that we just had this last session that really was holding gun dealers accountable. From these straw purchases, and some of these illegal guns end up being illegal guns eventually, right? I don't think we can justify someone needing to purchase 10 guns this month and then another 7 guns the next month. Like, these aren't for personal use anymore. It also banned high capacity magazines and these AR-15 style rifles. And so I voted for this, and I know this makes some people upset. I think we can regulate things and still protect the Second Amendment, and folks have the right to protect themselves and hunt and sport and do all that. I look at as someone as a retired military officer, do we want guns that might not be automatic but cause the same damage from a semi-automatic standpoint on our streets that our kids are facing in schools, that our law enforcement, that our citizens are having to face, and that is really the weapon of choice when it comes to a mass shooting. When it comes to our young people, the fact that our young people have access to this, and like the DA mentioned, right, that they can go to some of these websites and make these purchases. These are things that none of us growing up had access to, right? And so I'm all about, once again, accountability, but I want to hold accountable the people selling these guns, the people that are allowing these straw purchases, and I would even say the manufacturers. We know what these weapons do. These are machines that kill. And the argument always is that, well, any tool could be used to kill, a baseball bat, a frying pan, or whatever, right? But this is the weapon that's chosen. And at the end of the day, I'd rather go up against a frying pan or a baseball bat than one of these semi-automatic rifles with a high capacity magazine. So we have to make a choice in our country where we want to live, what we want to do. But our kids have access to these things, and it's a problem. And if we just make it about that we're going to go after the kids and not the people providing the weapons and not holding them accountable, we're just going to have a lot of young people in the system. And so that's what I worry about. Once again, accountability, but we have to look at the source of where these weapons are coming from. Thank you.
So we are, in the last few minutes. Diane, I see your hand up. Go ahead and ask your question. And then candidates, if you can just give kind of a closing statement with your answer, and then we will wrap it up.
Hello, both of you. Hi, everybody. So I had so many questions, but obviously, I have to narrow it down. Going on the gun violence issue, my son and I are direct survivors of gun violence. So I really applaud Kathy for everything you've done. I've done a lot of testifying on my own. I have really mixed feelings about this. I'm from a military family too, so I completely support the Second Amendment. It's just it's the messaging. It's fighting the messaging, and so that's one thing. You know what, we talked about this a lot. My other big issue is healthcare delivery throughout our state. We all know how bad it is. We all know the fight constantly between the legislature, the governor, quite frankly, med malpractice lawyers, that whole system. Well, what's the answer? Because I can tell you, I have a couple life altering chronic diseases. One will ultimately kill me. And I can't go out of state for treatments that I desperately need. And the issue is, I live here in Albuquerque. When I was doing a lot of things for the rural and the Veterans Caucus, was going around the state, really, really trying to push for, the focusing on veterans and rural healthcare delivery. And so I want to tell you something personally. I have a doctor over at the Cancer Center, and he's actually leaving the practice. He's only, in the 3 years I've been a patient there, they've only ever had one primary care doctor for the entire system. And now they're closing it down, right? So I had my last appointment with him yesterday. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, who's going to be my gatekeeper on top of all my specialists, right? Again, here in Albuquerque, it's already bad here. So I asked him where he was going, and he said he was going to Grants. He was going to be a provider there in Grants. And jokingly, he said, Diane, if you can't find somebody here, come on out to Grants, do the drive, I'll see you, right? So we started talking about that. And he said a town of 9,000 people has, if you look at it proportionately, has a higher amount of healthcare professionals there than we do here in the metro area. And he explained why. He explained that, you know, um, providing services to the surrounding communities, but that now people from the metro areas are trying to get in to see professionals in areas like grants. So my real issue is, and I don't know what the answer is, but this healthcare delivery system that we have in the state, I feel very strongly that the legislature is playing with people's lives. I am one of thousands of people whose lives are being completely impacted by this. And so I would like for both of you quickly to talk about this, your views, your stances, and what are you going to do about it?
So I'll be fairly quick because I do have an 8 o'clock that I have to get on, but let me just tell you some of my ideas. And by the way, I completely sympathize and agree with you 110%. We don't just have a healthcare issue we're dealing. We have a healthcare crisis right now in this state. The delivery of healthcare when my 88-year-old mother has to wait 4 months for a doctor's appointment is absolutely unacceptable. It's unacceptable in every way, and we have to do better. It's not just doctors. We have a shortage of 6,000 nurses statewide. It's a real issue. We need to, the medical malpractice legislation that just went forward is an important first step. However, don't be fooled. No one's going to, there all of a sudden, we're not going to have a mass entry of doctors right now. It's going to take some other things as well. We have to have a sense of urgency. We need to limit gross receipts tax right now on medical services. That's to me is a no-brainer. We're only one of 2 states that tax medical services. We have to join every interstate compact. I'm completely in support of that as well. We have to reimburse for every year you practice medicine. In the state of New Mexico, we reduce a year of your medical school debt. A lot of doctors have a lot of medical school debt. Let's make sure we are giving them and making this a really attractive place to come work. Tax credits. If you practice in rural health, you get a tax credit. If you practice in an underserved area, you get a tax credit. For your medical malpractice premiums, you get a tax credit dollar for dollar. But all of those things together, we also need to make New Mexico as attractive a place for doctors and their families to live. Doctors are educated, of course. And by the way, more residents, we need to establish more residencies. But we want to make New Mexico a place where doctors want to come to and they're educated and they don't necessarily, when they hear all of the statistics that we're first in crime and 50th in education, we have to work on all of these things. We can and we will, and we have to have a sense of urgency. The nurse shortage right now. We have a situation now where we have hospitals that don't pay their nurses enough. The nurses, though, then become travel nurses. Then they travel back to New Mexico, getting paid a travel nurse rate, standing next to the person who didn't become a travel nurse, making 3 times as much. It's not equitable. It's not right. It's one of the reasons why we don't have enough nurses in our state. We have to really bulk up all of our educational stuff when it comes to turning out more nurses in our state and more doctors. But we have to have a sense of urgency. I think, and by the way, I'm very proud to, to remind everybody that I was endorsed my candidacy by the medical healthcare providers union here in New Mexico. So I'm honored for that. 1199, I think, is the number that they have. But I would be thrilled to get your vote. I'd be thrilled to get your support. These are tough times we live in. We have a tremendous amount of challenges and a tremendous amount of opportunities, and we've got chaos and a president that just continues to create chaos for New Mexicans like he does the entire country. We have to have a tough person, someone, and I think I've expressed my feelings on ice, but this whole thing with what happened at Zorro Ranch is another example. We need leaders who are going to marshal the resources and work with the committee that the legislature just started up, to work with the Attorney General, to bring transparency, accountability, and justice for the victims and the survivors of Zorro Ranch, and the truth for every single New Mexican. The most prolific child sex trafficker in this country's history, and much of it went on right here in New Mexico, and we haven't held one person accountable yet for it. That's going to change when I'm your next governor. And finally, I'll just say this. I've been ringing this bell, and I know you all know it. I've been asking my opponent to debate me. If we want to have a leader who's tough enough to stand up to Trump and deal with all the BS coming out of Washington, I would think that we, as governor candidates, would want to be able to take the stage and answer tough questions thrown at them in our own Democratic primary. That's why we'll continue to ask for debates. It's the most basic form of democracy there is. It's something that's important so that everybody understands the vision that your various candidates have for the future of New Mexico. I don't know of an election that's going to be more important. And everybody says that. I know every politician says it. But you can't tell me an election in New Mexico for a New Mexico position that's more important with what we're dealing with in Washington, with the challenges we have in the future to make sure that our kids have opportunities here. You can't tell me a more important election than this governor's race. So I'm honored to be in front of you all. I look forward to communicating with you whenever you need. Please reach out to the campaign or me. And thank you for being great Democrats. I appreciate you all. Thank you. I'm going to
Thank
sign.
you.
It's okay.
That's fine. Thank you for your time, DA Bregman. Senator Pope, would you like to close it out?
You know, a lot of what he said, I agree with. I kind of heard the opposite when it comes to the specialties in the rural areas and the access, everybody having to come to Albuquerque, even folks who need access to the VA and healthcare. Like healthcare is an issue. We passed some medical malpractice reform this session. Still want to understand if that's really going to impact what we did, what the insurance rates are. There's a lot of factors we're looking at. Do folks really do they understand our culture and want to come to New Mexico? The student loan repayments, we're trying to increase those. But also, how are we going to grow our own? And so I'd push for, we need to have an increase of the BAMD program, recruiting folks from areas that want to go back home and want to serve in their communities, to where we're not just hiring people short-term to pay student loans for a few years and then they leave. So we need to look at a lot of things, and some of those things, compacts. I mean, he mentioned a lot of the things that can help, and we need to continue to work on that. I also think we need to continue to work on a lot of these issues that we talk about. Is not that we can't talk about it and be honest and tell the truth about it, but we can't be negative all the time. I think sometimes that negativity, who would want to come work out here or live out here? We get enough of that every night when we watch the news. You would think that there is crime all the time. I've even heard from some candidates running that you can't be in Albuquerque after 6 at night, like it truly is a war zone. And so we have to be careful how we talk about our communities and where we live as well. I'll just end and say, thank you for this opportunity. I'm honored and humbled to run in this race. I am also a candidate that is not taking corporate money, corporate PAC money, or oil and gas money. And I'm staying true to that, which means I will be outraised by my opponent, and that's fine, but I'm still going to get my message out, and I'm not going to be beholden to anyone. I'm going to always be true and beholden to the people, and that's how I've always been. I'm honest with people. I take the stances that some folks don't like. We're right now dealing with the issue of data centers and jobs. But we have to be able to tell the truth and say what is good for our state, what is good for our people, and not bow down to endorsements or money, but what's right, and what's going to be good for our people. But at the end of the day, I'm going to be able to put my head on a pillow and understand that, hey, I did the right thing. And so I ask for your support, whether that be your vote or a contribution. And I'm just humbled and honored. And I want to be your lieutenant governor. The only negativity I get from some folks is, hey, we need you in the Senate. But I do tell them, why wouldn't you want to have somebody like me on the 4th floor being your voice and pushing these issues with the next governor, regardless of who that is? I think that's important because I want to be a different type of lieutenant governor. So thank you. And I appreciate being here.
Thank you, Senator Pope. Thank you all for joining this evening. Appreciate you all. We are past 8 o'clock, so I wish you all a good night. Take care.
Good night.